Well, sisters, have you ever traveled somewhere and arrived and found yourself rather disappointed, or it just didn't meet the expectations that you had drummed up in your brain? Well, we're going to talk about that topic today and ways to sort of avoid that disappointment that you might experience due to these expectations that we place on ourselves and on our travels. Welcome to Solo Travel Adventures for women 50 and older. I'm Cheryl Esch, your host, solo travel advocate, freedom traveler, and coach. This is your passport to adventure. Have you ever found yourself picking a destination based upon maybe a picture you saw on the internet or a social media post or reel from a travel influencer, and you thought, I need to go there, and so you book your flight, you plan everything, you get there only to find yourself disappointed? Well, I think we all tend to fall prey to that. I know I have fallen prey to that. And one example I can give you is when I went to Peru, we walked the Inca Trail, we saw Machu Picchu, but while we were there, we decided last minute, I had seen pictures of Rainbow Mountain. People had mentioned it to me. Again, there is this hype, you may have experienced that, and maybe not just with travel, but with maybe a movie. People hype up a movie and then you get there and you're completely disappointed because you have these huge expectations. Well, this happened to me at Rainbow Mountain because I later find out that the pictures that you often see on the internet of Rainbow Mountain have been doctored up, let's say, brightened up through, maybe Photoshop or something like that to appear more vibrant in their colors. And yes, that part was somewhat disappointing when I got to the top, but the memories of actually getting to the top and coming back down with my son are actually what I remember most about that particular experience. But yes, there can be times when we find ourselves rather disappointed. And why is that? Well, because we have these hyped up expectations of what a place is going to look like, what it's going to feel like when we get there. And that's just one example of one of my travel experiences that have not quite, hit the mark. They've left me a little disappointed. And I wanted to go over why is that? Why do we, or how can we avoid that? Well, one reason is we go in with these huge pictures. We have this attitude of what it should be like. And when we get there, it doesn't match. All right. So we've set these unrealistic expectations. And so that's one thing that we could avoid as we are preparing for a trip, to avoid that high expectations and to look at it and approach your trip or your travels more like a first time, never seeing anything on the internet, although that's hard to avoid, but from new eyes, like a child seeing Christmas for the first time or seeing snow for the first time, and having that wonderment, that curiosity will definitely help avoid some of that unrealistic expectations that we often place on a trip that we've planned. We've spent so much time planning. And so the other thing you can also do in your travels, I always talk about this because I feel, number 2, be flexible in, your travels, because that's where you're allowing space for interesting things to happen or things you weren't expecting to surprise you. Right? So always build in that space for that and be flexible. Even though you may have an itinerary planned out, make sure you have, allowed space or time to, just be in a space and just enjoy it and experience it as it is meant to be experienced for like a first timer. Third thing you can do is do some research, but just so you know what to expect. For example, Maybe you arrive in Paris and had not done your research to discover that for the Louvre, for example, you needed to purchase tickets ahead of time. Same with the Eiffel Tower. Like, these are things that would be nice to know beforehand. Or, reading up or researching, okay, what is the typical wait time to see such and such? What should I expect there? Because going in knowing that information will prevent you from being frustrated by the circumstances. And so that would be a third thing to help you avoid some disappointment from your expectations. Number 4, don't compare yourself to others, especially not to what you see on social media, especially from those travel influencers. If you really see behind the scenes, you often don't see what really is going on or how they might actually be erasing things in the background or how many shots they actually took to get this perfect, beautiful, image that you were looking at and thinking, oh, I want to go there. So do not compare what other people have experienced in that particular place that you are traveling to, because you are a different person than them. You come in with different experiences, different backgrounds, and different attitudes. And, just don't compare how they experienced it versus how you will experience it. And again, that's that whole, going in with fresh eyes and curiosity. Number 5, be present in the moment. So I had this wonderful quote that I actually really, I love because I think it really capsulizes what I'm talking about here. It's by Henry Miller, and it says, one's destination is never a place, but a new way of seeing things. So when I talk about being in the present moment, I would encourage you to see things differently while you are in that space. Some examples might be, imagine you are a photographer and you're seeing through this lens to capture an image or perspective that no one else sees, that you might miss if you were just passing by. And one of my favorite photographers is Ansel Adams, and he has captured so many things that, even though I've been to many of these he's got a great book on national parks and other landscapes, and many of us have seen them, but we haven't captured or seen it in the way that he has seen it or captured it. So, maybe imagine for a moment while you're sitting or in a city somewhere, imagine you're a photographer and you're trying to capture something that other people might not have stopped to see. You can also use all 5 senses. Now, there's a great explorer from the 19th century, James Holman, and in 1857, he actually died being known as the most traveled explorer in world history at that time. Now, what makes this extraordinary is that he was blind. And so I love the idea of using all 5 senses. So, he had heightened, as we know, when someone's blind, they have heightened awareness in their smell, their taste, their hearing is heightened because they lack the ability to see, which is what we mostly rely on when we go someplace. We just see an image, we see a place for what it's worth on the surface. We don't look at it or experience it wholly. And so if you're struggling to use your 5 senses, one way that you can really experience a place, and again, I want to reference, I think of Anthony Bourdain as someone who, when he traveled, he experienced the culture with all 5 senses, in my opinion. And so to get to that place, you may want to actually think in reverse, meaning you might ask the question, where might I go for the most intriguing smell? Now, you might need to ask some locals to help you with this. Where might you find the most delicious taste in this area? Are there unique textures that might be indicative of this culture that you could touch, maybe going to a market and experiencing through textures? What are the sounds of that culture that you could go and experience? So this is another way to to change your expectations, because these are ways to experience a place, a travel destination that maybe other people have not explained or shared with you. Like you said, you're just seeing pictures, so you're basing it off that. And then I would say another way to look at things differently and to really truly experience and be present, as I was talking about being present in the moment, is to actually just sit in the space and sit there and observe, not just see the surface, what is obvious, but see if there's something more. Notice the details, and that will bring you a whole different experience and change your perspective of what your expectations were or would have been. And I think the final way to avoid disappointment from your travel expectations, number 6, is to really focus on the positive. And this, of course, is just having that attitude, as I mentioned earlier, of being curious and looking at things through a different lens, through the eyes of maybe a child for the first time, and understanding that it's more than just a picture when you travel. Yes, those are lovely and they're beautiful to put on social media. But if you've traveled a bit, you know it's more than that. Travel is more than just taking a picture to post on Instagram. It's an experience that needs to be experienced, as I mentioned, with all 5 senses. And I hope that when you approach your next trip and you've done your research, you've set some realistic expectations, that when you get there, you're not comparing your experience or the images you might have seen before you got there with what you are experiencing. Because in my example of the Rainbow Mountain, it was actually more about that journey, getting up the Rainbow Mountain, that brings back, every time I think about it, I kind of laugh, and it's very a warm memory for me. And it was the experience itself, not the view, although the view was lovely, and you feel accomplished when you get up there. But it was things along the way, whether it was, we did ride a donkey a little part way up, and, having that physical experience there, or laughing at myself or laughing at my son and how much we were struggling, having that experience to actually touch a llama at the top of the mountain, just, being that close to an animal. It was just all very, the experience itself was more important than the expectations of this picture that I saw on the internet that caused me to decide to go to Rainbow Mountain. But it was so much more. And I hope that when you approach, again, your travels, all your travels, that you will also see your travels through a different lens and avoid this disappointment, because, it's all really about how we approach our trip. As I said in point number 6, focusing on the positive. Even though it might have been, one day in the Camino, it just rained all day. And so for me, trying to look at the positive of that was, okay, well, it gave me the opportunity, because that day I decided I would take a train for part of the trail to cut off some time, and had a wonderful train ride. Enjoyed it, and the sun came out at the end, so it all turned out good. And so focusing on the positive is really going to help you avoid, in addition to those other things I mentioned, avoid disappointment from these expectations we place on ourselves and we place on what we feel this trip should be like. I hope you will take those to heart so that you can fully embody your next trip with all 5 senses and have good memories in a different way that can't be captured in pictures.